Module 6, Corpus Type, Nature of Data. In this module, we will discuss different types of corpus based on the nature of data with examples and reference to the corpora already developed in various other English and many other languages. So, whenever we speak about the nature of data, what we actually mean is that the text which is included in a particular corpus is of different nature. So, based on it, we can classify corpora in different types. Several broad types such as general corpus, special corpus, controlled language corpus, sub-language corpus, sample corpus, literary corpus, monitor corpus, monolingual corpus, and others. Each type of corpus is unique with its properties, features, compositions, and utility. So, we will be discussing one by one with reference to the corpora at present available. Now, first, the general corpus. Whenever we speak about a general corpus, we mean that it contains texts of all general type. It doesn't follow any predefined conditions that this particular type of text would be there, that kind of text would be there, or that kind of text is not permitted here. Broadly, it takes into account anything available in written text, written format, written form, and digital form may be included into general corpus. It covers text from various disciplines, genres, subject fields, and registers also. With regard to the form and utility, it is infinite in structure. That means it can be as big as it is possible based on the available amount of data or text samples, and it can have huge number of words, text types with wide varieties. So, also it gives a scope, normally it gives a scope to explore or to upgrade with new data, but since this particular feature is confined to the monitor purpose, we generally prefer to keep a specific time frame for a general corpus. Suppose if we are developing a general corpus, we give a particular time frame, okay, maybe for last 50 years is the time frame where the language is being collected and captured and put into the general corpus as a frame, because it is not going to be revised all the time. So, any information which is not available in a special corpus may be available in general corpus, because it has the authority to include all types of linguistic data and information in it. Therefore, whenever and wherever we want, we can retrieve necessary data and information from a general corpus to address our requirements. The criteria for selecting text for general corpus include the makers that draw lines of distinction between fictional and non-fictional texts. Also, there are markers of identifications of text obtained from books, journals, newspapers, and others. What is important point is that the text included in a general corpus should be marked uniquely so that each text's identity is adequately captured in subsequent analysis. Also, if required, we can have certain amount of spoken texts into general corpus, but this is not a very sensible proposition. Our argument is simple. If you can have general corpus of written texts in one side and general corpus of spoken text on the side, that's better. In that case, you can have a good representations of the language into its types. Important thing is that the texts, while in cases of generally spoken corpus, we can have text from the informants covering wide range of sociocultural or register variables. In case of written general corpus, we can have text samples from wide ranges of texts available in printed form or a published form in a language. The basic argument is something like that. It is always sensible, it is always better to keep both a general corpus into two parts. One is the text part, another is the speech part. Both of them actually constitute a general body, a general corpus of the time, and it should have a tag of time on it so that people get a very clear idea for which area, which language of this particular which area or which age this corpus represents. Against the general corpus, we come the second type of corpus is called a special corpus. Special corpus, as the name shows, text already stored in the general corpus can be retrieved and put into a separate form to give a texture of a special corpus. As you know that special corpus has special purposes. It represents use of language of a particular type of particular special kind, so it is met. Special corpus is normally small in size, very compact in representation, specific in usage, content is specified, composition is uniform, and utilization is specific. Suppose if we think that we are going to study the language used by children in their school answer scripts. So what happens? We are collecting here the texts produced by the learners while they are answering the questions in different examinations. So this is the special corpus on the sense that the data which is stored here is specific, analysis should be specific, goal of the data is specific, constructions of the corpus is specific, and utilization of the data of the corpus is also specific. So special corpus is actually a fragment or fragmentary part of the general corpus. So it is designed with specific purpose. Although we know that the data included in a special corpus is best representative of the target community or the target group or the target research, it hardly represents the general fabric of the corpus. So it constitutes a small part, but it doesn't represent the general corpus. So special corpus has special purpose, special goal, special orientation. Now, if we go to the sample corpus, third part is the sample corpus. Sample corpus is one of the major offshoots of the special corpus. Suppose we are trying to develop a newspaper corpus. So newspaper corpus has only the text produced in newspapers. So newspaper corpus is a special corpus where only the text published and produced in newspapers are stored into it. Now, if I want to make a sample corpus, then I can have a small part of the special corpus which represents a special corpus may be treated as a sample corpus. Suppose there are 5 newspapers published in 5 major English newspapers published all across the country. So the texts which are collected in major English newspapers in India constitute a special corpus, because the language used in those newspaper texts in newspapers are actually different from the English language used in other texts. But the part which has been taken from, say, from the northern part of the country, the texts coming from the newspaper published from the northern part of the country is actually a sample corpus of the special corpus of news text. So we have 5 different samples of texts or sample corpus of text or news texts combine together to form a sample corpus, a special corpus. So what we say that sample corpus is basically a miniature form of a particular special corpus having specific interest of the scholars. According to some scholars, once a sample corpus is designed and developed, it should not be open to any kind of addition or change in any way, since it may disturb the balance of composition and distort the actual image of the data required for special research purposes. A fantastic example is Zurich corpus of English newspapers in Europe, which is made in such a way to understand how the English newspaper published from Zurich actually use English, and whether this particular text corpus is actually representing the other English newspapers published all across Europe. So sample corpus is basically a part of the special corpus, which is again a part of the general corpus. Next issue is literary corpus. A special variety of sample corpus is maybe the literary corpus, which may be further subdivided based on the type or text included into it. This incidentally draws attention to biblical literary scholarship that began the work of the corpus generation centuries ago. We know there is a Bible corpus available to us where only the Bible texts from the Bible are included. In fact, there is a lot of expertise available in literary circles on such things as establishing the canon of an author's work. So, in case of literary corpus, criteria may be considered for classifying the corpus include various parameters. So, while defining a literary corpus, we can also classify some parameters, identify the parameters, which can also help us to identify to which literary genre or time a particular text belongs. Say, for example, we can have texts, a full-fledged corpus, a particular author. Say, literary corpus or literary works of Shakespeare is a unique corpus where only Shakespeare's works are compiled together. Or literary corpus of Milton, Eliot, Hemingway, Rabindranath Tagore, Premchand or Bhartiya and many other scholars. So here we can have the total collections of texts produced by a single author. Based on a particular author, we can have the literary corpus. Also, text type of single author can also be taken. Say, plays produced by Shakespeare or text produced by James Joyce or short stories produced by Tagore can also be put together separately as separate literary corpus. We can have particular text of a single author. Say, the entire Paradise Lost can be treated as a corpus to study Milton. Or the entire text novel Ulysses can be treated as a particular text of a single author as a literary corpus to study how the author has constructed the whole thing, and the entire corpus can be analyzed to understand the mechanism involved behind it. We can have a corpus of particular genres, say corpus of fictions, corpus of novels, corpus of drama, corpus of short stories and essays. Or we can also have literary corpus of a particular period, say 15th century prose text, 18th century English novels, 19th century's literary criticisms or something like that. Also, we can have particular groups of the Romantic poets, corpus of the Augustan prose, Victorian novelists. So they also can constitute a corpus. So what we actually mean that in different ways the literary corpus can be assembled together or grouped together for our analysis. Similarly, we can think of and identifying the theme. Say, corpus of texts of revolutionary writings, corpus of texts of family narrations, corpus of text relating to industrializations, corpus of text relative to detective writings. So different ways we can use, different parameters we can use to classify those literary texts in the part as a part of the literary corpus. Next issue we can now come across is called monitor corpus. So monitor corpus is actually put against the general corpus, while we have identified that a general corpus have a specific time span tag on it and have a total representation. Monitor corpus is almost same to that of a general corpus, but with one feature very drastically different. There is no time boundary for monitor corpus. Means while a general corpus is usually synchronic in its composition, monitor corpus is usually a diachronic in its frame. That means this corpus is a kind of corpus which gradually augments its data and information and text with the change of time. So it has an opening for updating the existing knowledge base, existing data, existing texts with new collection of data and new collection of language examples in the corpus. So important point is that monitor corpus is open for constant upgradation and augmentation. That means with the progress of time, the database included in a monitor corpus is going to increase. It is free to increase its data. We need elegant systems to classify the data gradually being stored in the monitor corpus and subdivide and store them data in a very well-defined, systematic, hierarchical data management and storage system. So elegant data storage and management system is one of the primary prerequisites for the growth of a monitor corpus. While a general corpus is synchronic, monitor corpus is diachronic. It develops with time, with space, and with across generations. The best example of monitor corpus is Bank of English or Bank of Swedish. These corpora are open for continuous generation with new set of data. What is the advantage of it? Once a monitor corpus is open for generation, we get a systematic compilation of language data according to its chronological collection of data based on different time frames. So it becomes maximally useful for lexicographers, historical linguists, culture experts, and many more people who are interested into diachronic changes observed in language over centuries. So as you know that the total lexical load or lexical stock of a language undergo change across centuries, monitor corpus is the most reliable resource which can give us a very clear view how old words become obsolete, how new words come into practice, and how new ideas are taken into place in the construction of in the body of the text. Also, it shows how the lexicological changes words undergo across centuries in a particular speech community or society. So we are always interested to have a monitor corpus so that we can capture the changes available, not initially visible within time within a language so clearly within a short span of time, can be quite clearly captured if a monitor corpus is available. So it is very natural or very a basic requirement for each of the languages to have a monitor corpus so that over a long period of time we can get a clear-cut, diachronic, historical perspective about the changes taking place in the language. So, monetary corpus has a tremendous role in the total development of the speech community, preservation of its linguistic resources, linguistic properties, heritage, and other properties. The next important part is called multimodal corpus. In our earlier modules, we have already described or discussed the issue that the corpus so far we have developed are only in two forms. Either it is text form or in written spoken form. So what we get either in spoken form and a speech text corpus or written text corpus. What is important is that in human communication, look at the example. Suppose two friends are speaking. They are interacting with each other, standing at the corner of the road, and they are in a very heated argument. Now, if you notice it from the one side of the road, other side of the road, you will find out that while they are speaking, it is not that they are only speaking. Their body movement, physical gesture, facial expression, movement, hand movement, and many other properties, intonation variations, and many other properties actually combined together to generate the interactions. Now, if I have the audio record of that, we can have the speech or the spoken text involved into these interactions. Also, we can have some suprasegmental properties and noises and intonation variations, then emotional variations involved in the speech. But important thing is that the physical movements, the non-verbal cues which were involved into these interactions would be missing altogether. So, we won't be able to understand how the interactants use their hands, their postures, their gestures, their body movements, their head movements, their eye movements, and all those things were actually involved in the communication. So, that in part is missing in the corpus. So, this is really a real loss for a corpus linguist. So, even if we get audio text, the other non-verbal cues which have been involved, which have been used to analyze those or to build up those texts, are actually missing in the corpus. So, this actually leads us to think of a new type of corpus is called multimodal corpus, which targets to record and annotate several modalities of human communication that aims at including spoken texts, written texts, gestures, hand movements, facial expression, body postures, etc. So, all these things should come a club together. So, while we are analyzing a data, while we are analyzing a text, we must have the reference to those entities to understand how the text is actually built up, and we can give a better analysis, better interpretations of the texts with reference to those non-verbal properties. Obviously, the scheme of work involves several theoretical and practical issues, no doubt, to make this corpus maximally useful in composition and representation. You know that constructions of this particular kind of corpus is a real tough task and involves a lot of issues into it. How to capture the whole things, how to represent audio text, video text, physical gestures, verbal cues, non-verbal cues, a lot of things. So, representation of things in digital form is a real challenge for us. Also, there are more several physical aspects which are directly related to the designing the corpus of the type. So, the present communication technology and information technology has made us available certain tools which we can use for that purposes. So, recently some of the corpora of this kind have developed, like Human project, Similar project, SIL project, AMA project, where they are actually trying to capture the multimodal texts, both with audio and video texts, to provide in the corpus so that we can analyze information. So there are important issues involved into the multimodal corpus. First is building up models of behavior from multiple sources of human knowledge. Manual annotation, image processing, motion pictures, literature studies, all those issues actually come into play. Then next important part is coding of those texts. Coding schemes for annotation multimodal video corpora is a real tough job. Validation of multimodal annotations and metadata descriptions and multimodal corpora. Exploration of multimodal corpora various applications, how those can be used in the task of information retrieval, machine learning, meeting transcriptions, multimodal interfaces, summarization, translation, web services, communication, clinical studies, and all those many other areas, how those corpora can be used, data can be retrieved, information can be retrieved and utilized. Benchmarking of systems for products generated for the multimodal corpora is another issue, how to benchmark them. Then use of multimodal corpora for evaluation of systems developed or computational linguistics and language technology. Finally, we can also automated fusions of resources, how coordinated speeches, gauges, gestures, facial expressions, movements can be combined together and to retrieve the intended meaning of the texts. This is a real task for that. So multimodal corpus is not much a very ready-made available texts or something like that. It is a new innovation. People realize that the corpora so far we have got for other types may not be sufficient enough for understanding, particularly for spoken discourse analysis. So we need multimodal corpus, one of the most important resource for spoken discourse analysis. So it's a really new trend. People are now getting trained in it, learning the mechanism, the rudiments of collecting data, analyzing it, tagging it, annotating it, processing it, and utilizing the information retrieved from multimodal corpora in various domains of human knowledge and technology building. Now come to a new type of corpus. This is also a recent innovation, a sublanguage corpus. A sublanguage corpus contains only one text of a particular variety of a language. It is a language of a restricted domain, particularly a technical domain. A subset of sentences of a language forms a sublanguage of that language if it is closed under some operations of the language. For example, if two members of a communication team. So a sublanguage corpus is basically a subset of a language that is closed under some or all the operations of a language. In a sense, it lies at an extreme end of a linguistic spectrum, while a reference corpus lies at the other end. The homogeneity of structure and highly specialized lexicon restrict it to be quantitatively small amount of data so that it is able to demonstrate properly what is typically good or closure properties of a database. Thus, a sublanguage corpus is defined with the help of the internal and external criteria. Very limited in size, restricted data, restricted domain, no scope for modifications or change. While those internal and external criteria are well defined and restricted, controlled, it remains to be seen whether an external and internal criteria actually match in practice. The study of language used for special purposes shows that writers often conform to write elaborate prescriptions when composing a technical text or a professional content. Suppose we are dealing with a text relating to how to use computer. So the instructions given by the instructor or the text used in it is highly restricted, specific vocabulary, specific terminology. So it is so restricted that it has least chance to modify the content. If we do, it will become more or less a generalized type of things. So it is basically a sub-language corpus because it is highly restricted and it doesn't allow any kind of external or internal modifications. Under this scheme, corpora consisting of sub-language materials will fall under the head of a subcorpus, which compiles texts selected and ordered according to a set of predefined linguistic criteria to serve the characteristics of a particular linguistic variety. Component of a subcorpus to a certain extent illustrate the type of the language used for the sub-language corpus. It is also necessary to keep in mind that the language is a broad set that may contain all the conceivable utterances, including slang, poetry, as well as what we call the standard language. On the other hand, a sub-language is not merely an arbitrary subset of sentences, since it may differ in structure and vocabulary. For example, in medicine, a telegraphic sentence like patient improved is considered grammatical due to an operation that permits dropping of articles and auxiliaries. So in a sub-language text corpus, this sentence is very much valid, while in a general language corpus text, it may be treated as a segment. If we follow this definition, then the weather reports, stock market reports, computer manuals are examples of control language. All stands as examples of sub-language. The idea of sub-language needs to be distinguished from artificial language also and reduced language. The latter two terms are designated intentionally, whereas sub-language evolves naturally. Although terminology level, there are some deliberate acts of creation. It is argued that sub-language and control language are not mutually exclusive. What we understand is that sub-language corpus is an important resource in language technology, particularly in the task of machine learning. People working in the area of language processing realize that they need access to corpora containing sub-language materials in order to develop systems capable of handling specialized texts. It is also assumed that by narrowing the sub-variety in a highly specialized communicative context, actual structure of language will simplify and thus will become more amenable to automatic processing. The vocabulary too is restricted and specialized to correspond with the constraints of semantic, conceptual, and cognitive levels. So, sub-language corpus has specific use in language technology, particularly in cases of machine learning. Now we are coming about controlled language corpus. Controlled language is not an exclusive concept rather, since it puts special restriction on the grammar, style, vocabulary for the writers of documents in special domains. So, controlled language corpus is a kind of monitored or customized or pre-processed corpus which has been given for specific purposes. Suppose those people who are producing documents or say school grammars or some rudimentary texts for pedagogic purposes, for instructions, or developing those manuals, user manuals, they need a kind of controlled mechanism, a controlled database, which text corpus which they can use to develop these documents. Typically, a control language is formally defined so that the conformity of to control language standard is always verified. There are also some discussions on controlled language among scholars working in the language teaching, text editing and translations. Those people who are involved in language teaching or text editing in translation, they also require controlled language corpus for their respective purposes. I can give example. The Caterpillar Fundamental English is a very useful example for controlled language corpus. The exercises are restricted vocabulary to up 150 words back in the early 70s as a way of simplifying the version of teaching English so that the non-native English speaking people, clients, can read the documents quite easily. This is a similar kind of task where many of the times what happened that the people who are engaged in developing the textbooks are given a specific set of words and ask them to repeat those words time and again in the text so that learners don't have to toil hard to understand the unlearned words. That means the texts are produced with a specific set of vocabulary and with a specific set of syntactic rules. These are actually used or retrieved from the controlled corpus. So what happens here is that people are using controlled language corpus to develop mostly some object-oriented research manuals or guide manuals for specific end users. The objective of the controlled language corpus is the applications of language for technical writing. And to address the requirements of specific set of people who are engaged in specific set of tasks. So, a general corpus or a reference corpus or a monitor corpus are not going to serve their purposes. So, we need to have a very controlled texts where texts are plucked very carefully, lexical stocks are clustered in the texts, syntax, the scientific and technical terms are heavily loaded in the texts, so that those texts are well formed in such a manner that the technical people has least trouble in understanding those things. So this can be done in the situations when we have controlled language corpus ready for these purposes. So what happens in cases of early learning stages, the many organizations try to produce text for the learners with a specific set of vocabulary related to their regular most frequent terms in their regular communicative activities or regular texts. So what happens in cases of controlled corpus, most of the time texts are simplified one, highly modified one, revised one, and all complexities are removed so that these can be used as samples for teaching and collecting vocabularies and lexical stocks, technical and scientific terms for controlled language teaching and controlled language instructions. So thus the controlled language corpus has tremendous importance in developing specific set of people in the specific domain specific functions. To conclude, digital corpus is not a very old or ancient or traditional thing. It's a very new thing. Yet maybe around 50 years or so it has come to us. We are yet to reach to a very common consensus to what counts as a corpus and how corpus should be classified based on which parameters. Our experience in dealing with different types of corpus for last 50 years or so helps us to classify the corpora super made available to us based on different parameters in different ways, different perspectives and different angles to give a kind of platform to the end users to realize that corpus has corpus having certain specific features and compositions and content has a specific functions or utilizations or application potentials. It is clearly noted that a corpus may be designed and developed based on a number of parameters already predefined according to the requirement of an investigator. That means the scheme of corpus classifications which we propose here is always open for considerable changes, modifications, subject to availability of new parameters and new criteria. So that means the corpus classification scheme which we propose here is open to invoke counter arguments. So the decision ultimately what should belong to a particular corpus and how the selection criteria should be made virtually control every aspect of subsequent analysis and investigation of corpus. So in this module, we have actually emphasized on the nature of data and tried to understand or classify corpora based on the nature of data. Thank you.